In this tutorial we are going to learn different ways to add repeats into Muse Score. If you used an earlier version of Muse Score, the ways for adding repeats is very much the same. There are 3 symbols you can insert for repeating a section of music, including the one to mark the start of a section, end of the section, and the section before and after to be repeated. To add a repeat, we can either select the bar line or the measure when notation input is turned off and double-click on a repeat symbol. We can also drag and drop a repeat into the score. Some people may find this method more cumbersome. Note that repeating a section of music that has a repeat sign is optional. Certain repeats may be left out depending on the time of a performance. We are going to open a short piece and add a repeat at the end. Go to the palette on the left and we will find the repeat symbols under the bar lines menu. We select the bar line after the last measure and double-click on the end repeat symbol with the colon on the left. This is a church hymn for singing, so we can make it repeat as many times as the verses. We change the playback to 4. We go to the top left and make sure notation input is off. Then we go to the last measure where the repeat was added. We click anywhere on the blank space to select the entire measure. We right-click on a PC to open the menu. On a Mac you need to press the Control key before doing the right-click. And we select Measure Properties. At the bottom right we will see play count and the number 2. By default a section of music is going to play 2 times when you add a repeat. Here we will change the number to 4. When we do a playback, we should hear the piece repeat 4 times. We can set the play count to any number of times we want to repeat, down to 1 if we only want to play the piece through once, even with the repeat sign at the end. Stop the playback. Save the piece and close. Next we are going to open a piece with a repeat for the top and bottom sections. We don't need to put in a repeat symbol at the beginning of the first measure. The spot where we add the first symbol we are going to select the bar line. We can double-click on the symbol with the colon on the left followed by the one with the colon on the right. Or we double-click on the symbol with the colon on both sides. Either way will work. After that we go to the last measure and add an end repeat. Save the piece and close. The next piece we open has an upbeat in the beginning and a repeat at the end. An upbeat is the pickup note in the opening measure of a piece that is incomplete or has less than the number of beats in the time signature. We see that the time signature is in 3/4. The first measure has a 2-beat rest followed by the starting note, which is an upbeat. We are going to change the first measure so that we see only the upbeat note without the rest before. When you right-click and open Measure Properties, you see the heading Measure Duration and the 2 numbers for the original time signature that you cannot change. You see another 2 numbers under Actual you can change. Here we are going to change the first number to 1. The second number indicates the type of note used as the bass unit. We'd put in a 2 to indicate a half note, a 4 for a quarter note, an 8 for an eighth note, etc. Here we will leave the second number as is. Once we click on the OK, the first measure will have only 1 beat despite the time signature in 3/4. We re-enter the note that was deleted by Muse Score and we won't see the 2-beat rest in front of the note. The last measure has 2 beats followed by a 1-beat rest to add up to 3, as in the key signature. For this measure we are going to change the number of beats to 2 so that the rest would disappear. We go to Measure Properties and change the actual number of beats to 2. At the end of the piece we will add an end repeat. When we do a playback, we are going to get the piece to play without the rests in the first and the last measure. Stop the playback. A lot of pieces with an upbeat which is an incomplete starting measure also has an incomplete last measure. When you add the number of beats in both measures you get the number specified in the time signature. Another way to notate the piece is to put in a first and second ending when we come to the last measure. We close the piece and reopen it without saving. We leave the first measure as is and put the start repeat sign in the second measure. Next we select the last measure and insert a new measure as the first ending. We go to Add on top, Measures, insert one measure. We put in the same note we see in the last measure to the measure we added. Then we change the rest to the upbeat note, E. Once we are done we will make sure the notation input is off. Select the second last measure and insert an end repeat. Then go to lines under the palette and insert the first ending followed by the second ending for the last measure. If we did everything properly we should be able to get Muse Score to play back like the first version. Save the piece and close. The next piece we open has a second ending that spans two measures. Here we have an upbeat note in the first measure. We are going to add in a start repeat sign to the beginning of the next measure. We select the measure where the first ending will be and we will insert an end repeat followed by the first ending. If we need the first ending to span more than one measure, we shouldn't double click on the line and make it longer. The bracket would look okay on paper but the piece won't play back properly. We hold the Shift key and the right arrow to make the bracket span to the next measure. Here the first ending only spans one measure so we just leave it as is. The piece will now play back properly. In a performance, if we don't want to repeat a section of music with a first and a second ending, we'd skip the first ending and only play the second ending. In Muse Score, we need to delete the measures under the first ending to make a section play back only once. Inserting the second ending after the repeat is optional unless we have a third ending. This is just to make the piece easier to read. To make the bracket span two measures we do a double click, then hold the Shift and the right arrow. Save the piece and close. The next piece we open has measures that are the same. We see that measure 1 and 2 has the same notes, 4 and 5 has the same notes. Further down the page there are more measures that are the same. We can select a measure and use the start and end repeat signs for individual measures. The measure that is the same we can right-click and then do a delete selected measures. It is more common to use the start and end repeat signs for an entire section than single measures. Click on the undo button a few times. We close the other menus and open the repeats and jumps menu. The first symbol is the repeat measure sign to indicate repeating the same notes as the previous measure. One way to put in the sign is to select the second measure that is the same and do a right click and then cut to remove the notes. Then we double click on the repeat measure sign to add it into the score. The other way is to select the sign and do a drag and drop. You can use whichever way you find easier. We can add the repeat measure sign to one or more measures as needed. When we do a playback, all the measures with a repeat measure sign will be the same as the measure before. Stop the playback. Save the piece and close. In the next piece, the first two measures is the intro, and at the time signature change is where the melody comes in. In the middle of the piece at measure 14, the piece returns to the beginning of the melody and repeats 6 measures before skipping to the coda to end the piece. We use the scroll bar and go down to the bottom of the repeats and jumps menu. We find all the symbols we need. We select the third measure and add the symbol that looks like the letter S to the beginning of the measure. This is where the music will come back to on the repeat. The next thing is to separate the last section as the coda. We select the measure before the coda. Open the breaks and spacers menu and insert a line break. We select the measure after and put in the coda symbol. Move it a bit so that it doesn't overlap with the measure number. If you want to insert the text CODA, you can select the first note of the measure and add it in as staff text, which is optional. Next we insert the text DSL coda followed by the text to coda into the appropriate measures. The DSL coda and the to coda can appear on top or at the bottom of the staff, whichever is easier to read. You should always do a playback to make sure the symbols are inserted in the right places. Save the piece and close. The next example is a piece with a trio as the middle section. A piece written this way, you'd play the main section the first time with all the repeats. And then you will play the trio. After that you play the main section through the last time without any repeat to end the piece. We open the piece. The first thing we need to do is to insert a line break to separate the main section and the trio. On top of the new section we are going to enter the text trio as staff text. Next we will insert the repeat signs in the appropriate places. The 3 repeat signs at the bottom of the repeats and jumps menu is the same as the ones in the bar lines menu, so we can use these instead. At the bottom of the trio section we are going to put in a DCL finne to get the piece to go back to the top section. Finally we will put in the finne at the end of the top section to mark the end of the piece. The text DCL finne and finne can appear on top or below the staff, whichever is easier to read. Once we are done we can set the text DCL finne and finne to invisible if we want, since some of the scores do not have the text showing. When we do a playback, the piece should play properly. Note that after playing the trio, Muse Score will return to the top section and play it only once to end the piece. Save the piece and close. Earlier in this tutorial we looked at notating repeated measures using the repeat measure sign. In this section we will look at notating repeated notes using tremolos. A tremolo is an Italian term which means trembling. In music, a tremolo refers to repeating the same notes or alternating between two notes in quick succession to give a trembling effect. Before the 19th century, tremolos were played in a measured way with exact number of notes in a measure. First we'll look at the same notes that are repeated many times written as tremolos. Here is an example of a measure with the same 16th notes repeating for 4 beats. Depending on how you divide the beat into shorter notes, you can notate the piece in several ways. Suppose you see repeating notes as in this example. Here the smallest group of repeating notes has 4 16th notes. We will put in quarter notes with 2 lines through the stems for the tremolos. In the first measure all the notes are the same and can be notated as a whole note with a tremolo. Here is notated as 4 quarter notes to keep it consistent with the next measure to make the piece easier to read. By the 19th century, tremolos are usually played in an unmeasured way. Instead of notating a piece with fixed number of 32nd or 64th notes, you'd put in tremolos. When playing an unmeasured tremolo, we would play as many notes as possible. We are not concerned with playing the notes perfectly even or the exact number of notes. It is more common to see unmeasured tremolos notated with 3 lines for 32nd notes than the faster one with 4 lines. In Muse Score you see both options under the tremolo menu. We will open a piece and put in some tremolos as shorthand. Here we only need the tremolo menu open, so we close the other menus. In the first 2 measures, the same notes take up the entire measure for 4 beats. Further down we see 2 more measures that are the same. We click on the first note in the beginning of a measure, click on the whole note on top to change it. Then we go to tremolo under the palette and double click on the one with 1 line on the stem. Do the same for the other repeated notes. When we do a playback, the version with the tremolos will sound the same as the original. Save the piece and close. Next we will look at tremolos with 2 alternating notes. In this example we have alternating 16th notes for 4 beats. We start by notating them in pairs of 2 such as 2 half notes or 4 quarter notes. When we add in a tremolo to each pair of notes, we'd see something that looks like these. The one at the bottom right can also be notated with the 2 lines on top joined to the note stems. By default, when you add alternating tremolos into Muse Score, you will see lines in between 2 notes that are not joined with the notes. We open a piece and look at how to put in tremolos with alternating notes. We scroll the piece down a little bit. We see some alternating 16th notes from measure 16 to 19. We leave the second beat of measure 16 as is and change the notes starting from the third beat to the end of measure 19. Here we see groups of notes consisting of 8 repeating 16th notes making up 2 beats. We can notate the alternating notes as 2 quarter notes. First we turn on notation input. Select the quarter note from the menu bar. In measure 16, the alternating notes are C# and E. We go to the 4th beat of the measure and place the E followed by the C# in the 3rd beat. When we put in a note with a different beat value over an existing note, the new note would replace the old one. Otherwise, notes with the same beat value would be stacked on top of each other and form a chord. While the first alternating note is highlighted, we double-click on the alternating tremolo button with the double lines to add it in. We quickly add in the rest of the tremolos to the end of measure 19. As we are changing the notes, the spacing of the measures is adjusted automatically. After changing the repeated notes into tremolos, the playback would sound the same as the original version. This is an acceptable way of notating a piece. Next we will look at the second way of notating the piece with the double lines extending across the top of the two note stems. The steps are not too complicated. In this section we are changing the style the piece is notated, which will not affect the playback. We will put in overlapping notes on top of the tremolos starting from measure 16. First we turn off notation input. Select the first note of the tremolo, hold the shift and select the last note. Flip the note stem so that it is easier to distinguish between the new notes we're adding. We will insert the overlapping notes with voice 3. The reason for using 3 instead of 2 is that the note stems point the same direction as voice 1 when we add in the overlapping notes. Turn notation input back on. Since we're starting on the third beat, we select the half note and the rest on the menu bar to put in a 2-beat rest as a filler. Select voice 3 on the right. Click over the first note of the measure and we see 2 half note rests are added for 4 beats as indicated in the time signature. Select the 16th note on top. While we're on voice 3, we add the same 2 alternating notes C# and E over the tremolo. Turn notation input off. While we're on the second 16th note, change the head type to half in the inspector panel. Select the first 16th note and do the same. What this does is change the note head to look like a half note with an open circle but does not change the beat value. We're getting close. Set everything we don't want to show to invisible. We select the rest on beat 1 and uncheck visible. Next select the first rest on the tremolo, hold the shift and click on the second rest. Everything within the same beat range is highlighted. Set invisible. The one thing left is the line hanging down on the left. We select it and turn visible off. Here the spacing between the notes looks too tight. We double click on the second 16th note we added. Hold the right arrow key and watch the horizontal offset under the inspector panel go up to 4. You can set the number higher or lower if you wish. Click on the white space to turn off highlighting and we see that the note is further to the right. We can take a shortcut by using copy and paste for the other tremolos. We click on the first note, hold the shift and click on the very last rest on the right to select everything within the 2 beats. Do a copy using the shortcut keys Ctrl+C. Click on the first note of the next tremolo. Use Ctrl+V to do a paste. Paste over the other tremolos the same way. Here we are using a tremolo that is already formatted to replace the other ones. We go back and change the notes to match the original. Here all the second alternating notes have the same Y, so we only need to change some of the first notes. Make sure the 2 overlapping notes are exactly the same and we should get the piece to play back correctly. Select a note and use the up and down arrow keys to move it to the right place. The last thing is to do a playback starting from the first note in measure 16 to the end of measure 19 to see if we made any mistakes. Select the first note and press the space bar. Press the space bar to stop the playback. Save the piece and we're done. Bye for now and thank you for watching.